The Way of Will John.
Welcome back, everyone. We have Dr. Andrew Gallimore here, and we've got a lot to talk about. So, Andrew, what's going on? How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, actually, yes. I'm just still in Tokyo. I'm just currently kind of planning a new book all about DMT, so kind of busy with trying to clinch deals with publishers, that kind of thing. So it's a busy time, but an exciting time.
Okay. So, to be straight up front, for research into this topic, I want to let you know that for the last 6 weeks, I have been under the influence of DMT, and I know all the secrets of the universe now.
Please tell.
Obviously, I don't know if that's possible. So there's so much, like I said before we got on. There's too much for me to get into. But why don't you just give us the brief introduction to who you are and how you got into this, and then we'll go from there.
Oh, yeah. So, well, I guess I'm a chemical pharmacologist and a neurobiologist by training. I was a neuroscientist for the best part of a decade. Before that, I was a molecular biologist, chemical pharmacologist, doing kind of bench molecular biology research. I shifted towards neuroscience about a decade ago, and was working in a university in Okinawa in Japan, studying the brain, computational and mathematical models, trying to understand how the brain works. But my passion, if you like, my life's work, in a sense, has always been DMT. And so last year I left the academic arena permanently, and so that I could focus my energies entirely on DMT, writing about DMT, talking about DMT to people like yourself, and just trying to tell the world, really, of what a remarkable, astonishing, mind-blowing, choose your word, molecule DMT is. So, I mean, my interest in DMT goes back to when I was a teenager, really. You know, as a kind of an adolescent with kind of typical adolescent interests that kind of morphed into a more academic and scientific interest in psychedelics. How is it possible that these molecules, these simple molecules, can enter the brain and cause such dramatic changes in the structure and the dynamics of your subjective world? That's always fascinated me and continues to fascinate me now. And DMT is the ultimate, really. That's the one that still, I think, evades a good, solid, rational explanation for how it's possible that your brain can suddenly be catapulted into these bizarre, hyperdimensional, impossibly complex domains filled with these highly, apparently, inordinately intelligent alien intelligences and beings. I mean, it's almost miraculous to me. And so that's really what I've been, that's kind of what's brought me to this point, this fascination of this great mystery of DMT.
And so to take it right in there, obviously, for someone who hasn't ingested or, experienced or smoked DMT, let's start right there. What happens when someone does this, and where does it take them, and what are they experiencing?
Yes, so DMT, it's a very, compared to things like LSD and psilocybin from magic mushrooms, which last for hours, DMT is a much more powerful psychedelic. Its effects are much more intense, but also very, very brief. So you're in the DMT space, as we call it, for just a few minutes, really. But you are really hurtled from, you smoke it, basically, or you vaporize this freebase DMT, inhale it, fill your lungs. Just one lungful is normally enough. And then immediately, within a few seconds, your world begins to change. And pretty soon, within the first few seconds, you are hurtled through this rapidly changing procession of highly complex geometric imagery, beyond any kind of complexity that you would ever experience in the normal waking world. And then, assuming that the dosage is sufficient, you reach what's called breakthrough. So this is when you seem to transcend the mere complex imagery, complex geometric patterns, and burst through some kind of veil into some apparently freestanding alternate reality, a populated alternate reality filled with this diverse ecology of extremely strange, apparently extremely powerful and intelligent and technologically and cognitively advanced beings. You will then normally look around wide-eyed, shocked, appalled, mind blown for just a few minutes, although it might feel like quite a bit longer than that, and then you're kind of dragged back into the normal waking world, normally shocked and awestruck and shaking and thinking, you know, what just happened to me? How is that possible? So that's a typical, what we call a breakthrough DMT trip. Brief, but extremely, extremely powerful.
And I want to touch on this brief portion of it, right? Because as you explained, that if you smoke it, it's quick, and as long as you have that breakthrough, your entire world will change. Essentially, the nature of reality in front of you, and and your entire world is completely shifted. You are dabbling, I should say, and I say that kind of jokingly, with something called target-controlled intravenous infusion,
right?
Which, if I'm to understand this correctly, can allow you to then prolong the experience for an extended, I don't know how long, you can tell me how long, but my question actually is, first on how long is that happening? The second is, what are you bringing back? Because that's always a thing, and me as a guy, as a meditator who's had some OBE experiences and some strange experiences, right, in the meditative state, even from the dream state as well, what you can convey, right, what you can bring back, that knowledge, that understanding and stuff, is sometimes it's difficult, right? And especially, I would imagine, when you're dealing with a whole world that is completely alien to ours, sometimes it's not that you can come back and write everything down and describe it or draw it perfectly. So how do you handle that?
Okay, there's a few questions in there, packed in there. So the intravenous, first of all, let's start with this extended state technology, what's called DMTX. So as I said, the normal DMT trip is just a few minutes when you either inhale it, the vapor, or using an injection to your bloodstream. That's also been done, but it still lasts only a few minutes. But in collaboration with Rick Strassman, who you are familiar with, who wrote DMT, the Spirit Molecule, and did the world's largest study at the time of DMT in human volunteers, we developed this protocol, which is a continuous infusion of DMT into the bloodstream, that's informed by what's called a pharmacokinetic model. So a model of how DMT is distributed and metabolized in the bloodstream and in the brain once it gets into your brain. And using that model, you can then program this infusion device to deliver a precisely controlled infusion of DMT, a precisely controlled amount of DMT per minute into the person's bloodstream. The idea being that you can actually stabilize the DMT concentration in the brain over time, such that you can induce them into the DMT state, so to speak, and then hold them there. So rather than the DMT levels rising in the brain and then just a few minutes later dropping back down again as the DMT is metabolized, you compensate for that metabolism by adding more DMT continuously into the brain. So you're holding it at that level, basically. So that means you can extend it then. Now, the question of how long how long is a piece of string? I mean, there's no theoretical limit to it. The great thing about DMT is it doesn't exhibit what's called subjective tolerance. or not significant subjective tolerance. So you can inject someone with DMT, and then 30 minutes later inject them again, and they have the same intensity of effects with the same dose. That's very different to something like psilocybin or LSD. So you can maintain this stable brain DMT concentration, and they will stay within this DMT world for as long as you keep the machine on. As long as you keep pumping them with DMT, they will stay within that world. Now, there are a couple of groups, research groups, one at Imperial College London, who have actually implemented this technology, which myself and Rick Strassman proposed back in 2016. They've just finished the first study. They induced these volunteers into the space for about 30 minutes. This is more like a pilot study. There's another team in Basel, Switzerland, who are, I think, in the early stages of a 90-minute infusion. So, for most people, 5 minutes or so is quite enough in that space, believe me. So the idea of being there for 30 minutes, let alone 90 minutes, is for most people kind of insane. But, as you were saying, these are impossibly strange and bizarre and complex realms filled with all these different unimaginably strange and curious intelligent beings. So 5 minutes is not enough to bring back data. 5 minutes is just about enough to kind of get your bearings, to kind of orient yourself a little bit, to kind of get over the shock of what's just happened to you. And then normally, once that's happened, you're normally dragged back again. It's the DMT experience is over by that point. So this technology does allow you to kind of get your cognitive tools in order, to kind of establish yourself, orient yourself within this domain. And then you can start to think about, well, what can we do now? We can start to explore more formally. We can start to perform experiments within the space. We can send subjects into the space with questions. Can you examine the types of geometry that you're observing? Simple things. Can you map the types of entities? Did you see this entity? Do you see that entity? Can you establish two-way communication with the entities? You can do so much more. It's opening up literally an entirely new world. What appears to be a seemingly endless and endlessly complex and diverse world. So with regular DMT, in 5 minutes, you can't even say, scratch the surface would be saying too much. So really, this technology, by allowing you to go in there for an indefinite period of time, means you can start to bring back information. Now, we don't yet. The study that was done at Imperial was, as I said, it was just 30 minutes. It was a pilot study just to demonstrate that the technology works, that it was safe, that people could tolerate being within the space for 30 minutes. But we're really just getting started with that. In the future, you can start to think about, are there experiments we can perform? Can we ask the entities specific questions about their origin or about their nature? It's discovering and exploring an entirely new world, and we're just getting started.
And the way that we're having this discussion and the way that you're referring to the, let's say, entities and other beings, we should probably touch on this because we haven't, and I have some questions here dealing with obviously the brain, the nature of reality, what's generating the brain, etc. But who are these entities? Maybe that'll help get that. Who are they? Are we generating them? Is that coming from our brain? I know this is a huge question, but I'm also, hoping to hit people who have never either even understood the idea of what DMT is and the idea of this other dimension, what another dimension is, and who could be there, how we're interacting with them, how this type of question. So, as best you could, and I know it's an impossible task, who or what are we dealing with? Something internal or something external to us?
Well, it's a very deep and difficult question. I think the short answer is we don't know what we're dealing with. But for me, I mean, I'm a neuroscientist. I approach this from a neuroscientific perspective. My question is, can we explain why people would be confronted with these types of entities in the DMT state? And I don't think, I mean, look, you know, if you go to sleep and you dream at night, right, you encounter entities like other humans, animals, right? The brain is able to construct. I mean, your brain is always constructing your world, and that's another point, I guess, an important point, is that your brain is always constructing your world, your subjective experienced world is this model that's being constructed by your brain all the time. And that applies under all circumstances, whether you are awake and navigating the environment, whether you are asleep and dreaming, or indeed when you are at the peak of a DMT trip. It's always being generated by your brain. But the difference is when you're awake, there's information coming from your senses, sensory information that's helping to kind of constrain and modulate and inform the world that your brain is constructing. But the world itself is always this model that that is being built by your brain. So when you dream, your brain is disconnected from sensory information. But you tend to dream, and there have been many studies over many decades that have looked at the content of dreaming. We tend to dream about the same things we see in normal waking life. We dream about the same kind of people. We dream about the same kind of animals we see in normal waking life. People dream about dogs. They dream about cats and cows and horses, that kind of thing. Because that's what your brain has learned, has evolved to model, is the things that we see in the normal waking world. So it is kind of confounding to me and very difficult to explain why, when you perturb the brain with this very simple plant molecule, it suddenly becomes capable even of constructing these impossibly complex worlds that have no relationship whatsoever to the normal waking world, to the world that your brain evolved to model, filled with these incredibly entirely non-human, non-animal entities that also have no relationship to any kind of character that you would meet in normal waking life, or in your dream world, or in the pages of pulp science fiction novels. I mean, these are completely disjoint, completely different types of entities, different types of life forms, intelligences than you would ever meet in any other circumstance. So for me, that suggests that there is something stranger going on here than just your brain making it up, you know. I think it suggests to me that there could be some alternate source of sensory information. Your brain is gaining access to an alternate source of sensory information, which is allowing it to construct this model of this other place within which these other beings reside. How that works, we still don't know, but everything I've been thinking and writing about over the last couple of decades points to that conclusion, that it's incredibly difficult using the paradigm of modern neuroscience to explain how your brain allows you to observe these kind of extremely strange worlds in the presence of DMT. In other words, so, I think they could well be real. Okay, but I don't know what they are.
I mean, yeah, right? It's easy to lean towards that. I do too, you know, and I'm debating on where I should go next before we go too far away from the ability to keep someone in there for a long period of time. I want to go and throw something at you that I've never had the ability to ask someone of your nature. You're aware of who Alex Jones is?
Of course.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
I don't know if you've ever seen this. I don't want to call it a rant, but he goes on this explanation. I don't know if you've ever seen this clip of the nature of reality.
Probably.
And okay, right. And he goes on to touch on DMT. There was one part in there that you know, and obviously it can be all conjecture, and he says he doesn't believe it, but this is essentially what the elites and blah 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 blah, whatever. That's not necessarily what I'm concerned with. What I want to know, you could probably have some sort of understanding of. He mentions in there that whoever is using or doing these tests or with DMT, were able to do something along the lines of shutting off the heart in order to prolong an experience. My question to you is, does that have any basis in reality? Or would there be any need to artificially pump the heart? Would this actually, do anything? Or is there any research into doing that, et cetera? That would be my question.
So is there any need to artificially pump the heart when someone is undergoing one of these extended DMT sessions?
Or perhaps to allow them to extend it for a further period of time? Is there any need for that, or is there any research into that?
Oh, well, I mean, once you get above kind of a day, let's say, no one's proposing that at the moment at all, right? But once you get above a day, you have to start considering life support. Now, what that means is nutrition, waste disposal, maintaining, they first of all, you need to start introducing nutrition into someone's bloodstream. But that can be done. If you think about an ICU unit, right? Someone who is in a coma, let's say, for several months, you have to take care of their bodily functions. You don't need to maintain, their heart will continue beating as long as they're getting adequate oxygen and nutrition, but you need to obviously feed them intravenously. You need to get rid of waste. You might need to, over even more extended periods, think about electrical stimulation of large muscle groups to avoid them wasting away, those kind of things. And interestingly, actually, NASA, so one of the kind of in recent years, NASA has been talking about this idea of how would you get somebody to Mars, right? How long is it going to take? Years, right? A several year journey, let's say. I don't know how many years, but a long time. And so they've been proposing that you wouldn't just, say, hey, you've got to, sit in this chair for this long haul 4-year flight, which would be appalling, and they would probably go insane. But the idea is to actually put them into some kind of suspended animation. That sounds kind of science fiction-y, but really what it means is putting them into a state where they are, their body has cooled down, they're effectively asleep, all of their bodily requirements, again, food and waste disposal, muscle stimulation is all taken care of, so they effectively go to sleep for those 3 years, and when they wake up, they're still functioning. So you can imagine repurposing that for extremely extended DMT experiences, where people go on several month expeditions into the DMT worlds and effectively live within these DMT worlds for several months at a time, whilst they're this machinery, this pod, it would probably be some kind of pod they would be lying inside, something like straight out of Alien, the movie, or The Matrix even. You can imagine that kind of thing happening. That's speculative, but the technology isn't so far off. It's something that could be done, I think, but I don't think anyone's actually, as far as I'm aware, nobody's actually thinking about actually doing this in humans, but there might well be some hidden, clandestine Alex Jones type kind of, as Alex Jones might suggest, the CIA or something,
yeah.
Or kind of running these experiments since the 1960s and is making deals with the machine elves in the DMT world. I don't know.
Right. Because that's another thing that I wanted to get into, because, first off, before I go, a really short question. Would you ever put yourself through that? Would you be willing to go for 6 months on a DMT excursion? No. No, I can't imagine it. There are many kind of psychonauts who are much kind of more kind of DMT heads than I am. That maybe they would be willing to, but I think that would be It would be a long period of training and development before you would ever embark on such a long journey. It would start with 30 minutes and then a few hours, and then to get to the stage where someone's going in there for these 6 months expeditions is for me anyway, it's kind of unthinkable. But
maybe in the future.
Okay. Well, because you mentioned potentially there are some government, some clandestine, organization, and so I essentially wanted to know. Certainly, there are these groups and factions of people who are aware of this and have the means, and more money and more funding than say you do in order to test something like this, and they may very well have, an advanced technology that allows them to do something like this. If you could, guess, let's say, what something like this would be bringing back, or what they would have found, or what they would be, dabbling into. Do you have any idea what sort of knowledge, understanding that they would have that you wouldn't have because of the short nature of a 30-minute to 90-minute? So essentially, what sort of pieces or keys to the puzzle of the nature of reality do you think would be solved by being able to go there that long?
Well, I think first of all, if we could definitively establish that there were indeed intelligences, highly advanced alien intelligences that were existing outside of our little slice of reality, outside of our space-time, and that we could actually communicate with great ease by just inhaling a lungful of one of the simplest plant alkaloids on the planet. That in itself, I think, would be the most shattering and important discovery in the history of humankind by far. So I think establishing what they are and where they're from, and that they do indeed exist, before you enter their realm and continue to exist after you leave their realm. That in itself, that would be the first thing to do here, is work out who are we dealing with? Are we dealing with some alienated fragment of our own collective unconscious, or something like this, as some people have proposed, or are we dealing with actual independent intelligences? That would be the first thing to establish. And once you've done that, then begins a process of establishing two-way communication with them. What can we learn from them? What could you learn from an alien intelligence that is perhaps several million or billion years more advanced than us? I think it feels like when you go into that space, it's so advanced. It's this hyper-technological, constructed inorganic domain filled with these astonishingly intelligent and advanced beings. It seems like they are a product of a vast period of technological and biological, post-biological evolution. They're like what we could be in a million years' time, when we've completely dispensed with our physical, wet bodies and entered some other kind of domain. It feels like you're entering that kind of space. And so yeah, what could you learn from a being that's a million years more advanced than us? Presumably you could learn everything. Presumably they know everything about the nature of reality and of where we came from, where we're going. Could it be that they will allow us, or give us the information required for us to kind of enter their domain? Are they the teachers, if you like, the gurus that will help guide us along the path towards our own transformation, our own dispensing of our biological form and entering into a new type of existence as a conscious and intelligent species? That would be the ultimate aim, I guess. That would be the ultimate kind of information that we could gain from them. But then you could think of other kind of more trivial things, like, how to harvest energy from the quantum foam, or how could we, these kind of more parochial, earthbound needs that we have. Perhaps you could gain that kind of information from them, but that might be completely trivial and kind of meaningless to them. You're dealing with an intelligence that is so far beyond anything that we could consider a living organism, that they might, it would be kind of silly, if you like, to start asking them things about, how can we get energy? How can we, increase the efficiency by which we harvest energy from the sun or something like this? They would say, no. You need to aim a bit higher than that, my friends, because what's about to happen in the next few years is going to blow your fucking mind. I think that's,
Yeah. Well, I find that fascinating because I'm also very curious about our past as well. I mean, there's been a very big resurgence of, let's say, alternate history on the internet, let's say, over the last 10 years. And what our ancients truly knew, who they were, when did they actually, truly gain proper knowledge, and have we lost some of that? And so Graham Hancock, who I know you know,
yes, friend of mine, yes,
has. Okay, cool. We've been back and forth as well with his assistant, trying to get him to come on there as well. So, but he had this theory on potentially, obviously, the ancient civilizations having an understanding, potentially, maybe not necessarily of DMT, but of the other realms and the other stuff. Do you essentially concur with that? Do you see evidence for these ancient civilizations in their works and in their stuff for knowing?
Well, yeah. I mean, Graham's the one to ask about that. I wouldn't want to say anything that's completely wrong. I mean, I'm a neuroscientist. I mean, a lot of what Graham talks about, I mean, Graham has been interested, certainly. It's not just the ancient civilizations that he's been interested in. He's been a very powerful advocate for altered states of consciousness. And he does believe that in the past, going back tens of thousands of years, these ancient civilizations were accessing these kind of domains. You go back to the cave paintings that go back 30, 40, 50,000 years. You see evidence of non-human entities in these being painted on the walls of these pitch black caves. And the question is, well, why did they do that, first of all? Why paint in a pitch black cave that no one's going to see? And then why do you paint non-humans, beings that are neither human nor animal? Where did the inspiration for that come from? And there is some evidence that if you place somebody into pitch black darkness for extended periods of time, they will start seeing things. And there are a number of neurological mechanisms for that. It could be that during extended periods of darkness, levels of endogenous DMT, so DMT being produced in the brain, actually starts to increase. And so it's kind of a natural way to have a DMT experience is to go into a cave for a week or more, and until the levels start rising in your brain, and then you have these visions, and then you encounter these entities, and then you start to paint them. So there is some overlap between my ideas and the ideas of Graham's there. Yes.
Okay. Can we touch a little bit more on this, because I also had this question. Is there any need to? I mean, there's forms of holotropic breathing and meditation and all these things. Have you ever encountered, or is it possible to get into the exact same state? And I mean, truly the same state without DMT. Have you ever run across that, or do you think that that's possible?
Well, I've certainly run across people who have claimed that that's the case. Many people who have never taken DMT often will say, well, I go to other worlds when I meditate for extended periods. But I don't think those individuals, they don't really have any idea of what kind of experience DMT is. It's not just going to another world, but it's something that's entirely unimaginable and incomprehensible in its complexity and its form. So I don't think you can necessarily compare. I mean, it's impossible for someone who's never taken DMT, in other words, to say that they've reached that kind of state during meditation. There are also people who claim to reach similar states using meditation, and who have taken DMT. Now, there are possible mechanisms for this. So we know that DMT is present in the human body in very low concentrations. It's never been demonstrated to ever reach kind of psychoactive breakthrough DMT, breakthrough DMT trip concentrations. But the brain clearly has the ability, and other organs as well, including the lungs, have the ability to generate DMT. So it might be possible that certain techniques can elevate DMT in the body, but I've certainly seen no real solid evidence that people can manipulate their endogenous DMT levels. The obvious answer to that question is, well, that we have DMT. It's readily available. It's a very common plant alkaloid. Clearly the most efficient and simplest way to experience DMT is to consume it, not to spend 20 years sitting on top of a mountain and meditating in the hope that you will have a DMT trip. Not to dismiss. I'm not dismissing, people who meditate or the profundity of their experiences. By the way, I'm just saying it's obviously the most efficient way is to actually take DMT.
Right, in the most direct. What I find interesting about all of it is because DMT is, when people take different psychoactive substances, they end up in different places, right? And that's what's so interesting about this, is that when people take DMT, their reports seem to be able to corroborate what they're saying with what someone else, and it seems to be similar, right? And when someone takes this substance, they seem to have this experience. And so what I find interesting is that if we are, just a bit imaginative, the DMT realm or world could be a place where you go when you meditate, could be another place, and it could be infinite, right? Obviously, within the whole scope of things, potentially.
Yes.
And so there could be a ton of places, right, that you could access, and we just have no idea because we're within this place. This is where we are. And so
I think
makes any sense.
It does make perfect sense, because my most recent book, Reality Switch Technologies, actually deals with this idea that the brain is this world-building machine, and there is a practically infinite number of different worlds, if you like, that your brain can construct. And DMT allows you to access one particular region of what I call the world space, which is basically the state space of all possible worlds that your brain could possibly construct, all possible worlds a human could experience. We sit within the normal waking world is like a small district, a small patch within this vast, almost infinite world space. And when you take DMT, you shift dramatically and rapidly into another district of this world space. And other drugs, as you say, can move you into other areas. And so you have this kind of endless landscapes of the mind that are available for our discovery and for our exploration. And I think in the future, part of the development of psychedelic drugs and even post-molecular kind of drug technologies will be about exploring, these different types of worlds and saying, okay, can we go to a different place? That's, can we start to map this world space and find all these different locations, these different types of worlds, the vast majority of which, 99.999% or whatever, no human has ever visited, and yet our brains could, given the right stimulation with the right molecule or other technology, could actually visit, which is kind of a remarkable thought, really, that we sit within this tiny area of a vast number of possible experienceable worlds, and we haven't discovered almost any of them.
It does seem like that. It definitely does seem like that we are sitting within this small section of our abilities, right? We can only see a certain level within light. We can only hear a certain level of, a pitch and stuff like that. And so, actually, this is a slightly off, but is there any other drug out there like this? Drug, what plant or substance that could give you an experience like DMT that we could study or are studying? Is there anything like this at all?
Well, I think DMT is kind of exceptional in that it's kind of ferociously efficient in switching this reality channel very, very cleanly into this other other type of world. There are other drugs like 5-methoxy-DMT, the toad venom, as it's often called, from this Bufo alvarius toad's glandular secretion.
That's different.
Oh yes, yeah. This is completely different. So DMT is N,N-dimethyltryptamine, whereas from the toad it's 5-methoxy-N,N-dimethyltryptamine. So it's got an extra piece on that. So it's a completely different molecule, although relatively similar structurally, chemically. It has completely different effects. So you seem to kind of go past this highly complex and content-rich DMT worlds through to this kind of what's described as like a white light, where you enter this formless field of pure consciousness without any kind of form, or your entire ego, your entire sense of self, your humanity, the existence of humans, of anything, is gone, and you're just in this realm of pure consciousness. So that seems to be, again, another type of world, albeit very, very different to the DMT world, that your brain can reach, that your brain can experience. Then there's ketamine. High doses of ketamine. It's a dissociative anesthetic, but it's also, in my opinion, a type of psychedelic. John Lilly, this very famous physician, the dolphin whisperer, used to he had a famous project trying to understand the language of dolphins, but he was also a very heavy ketamine user, and he was using it, injecting large amounts every single day. And he went to other places. He established communication with what to him were these strange alien intelligences within this ketamine space. So the ketamine worlds are very different to the DMT worlds, but clearly it's a type of world that your brain can construct when stimulated by this molecule, ketamine. And so there are, an endless number of different drugs that can, certainly at higher doses, can allow you to transcend normal waking reality and go into some other different type of world, populated world with intelligences.
The active ingredient in ayahuasca, by the way, is DMT, or how does that differ from everything?
Yes, so ayahuasca it's actually, minimally, it's two plants. One of them contains DMT, and another plant contains what's called a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. If you swallow DMT, nothing will happen, basically. It's broken down very rapidly in your gut by this enzyme called monoamine oxidase. So it doesn't have any effect. It's orally inactive. But if you take this other plant with it at the same time, which contains a molecule or a number of molecules called harmine and harmaline, these bind to this enzyme and they stop it working. So this allows the DMT to escape being broken down in the gut and actually get to your brain. So this is called the ayahuasca effect. So ayahuasca is a decoction of boiling these two plants, this vine that contains your monoamine oxidase inhibitor called Banisteriopsis carpi, together with another plant called Psychotria viridis, or chacruna, which is a leaf that contains the DMT. So you boil those together for a long period of time, cook it down to a thick, dark, nauseatingly bitter liquid, which then you kind of gulp down, and that gives you a 2, 3, 4 hour trip, accompanied by lots of vomiting and other kind of purging. It's normally quite unpleasant in that regard. So it's similar. It's generally not as intense as smoked or injected DMT. Brain levels of DMT, when you take ayahuasca, normally only reach about 20% of what they reach if you smoke DMT. So the different levels, really. So it's a longer, slower, in some ways less intense and more gentle experience than being fired out of the cannon, of smoked DMT. I've not tried either, but leaning towards one. I don't see any need for me to vomit and purge. It doesn't. I mean, I know everybody likes it out there, and they feel like that's part of the thing. I'm just saying, I see all these other options out there, but anyway, a few years ago, microdosing kind of became a buzzword, especially within the tech community in Silicon Valley and all these places. I've not heard anyone microdosing
on DMT, obviously, or microdosing, using ketamine. So I'm curious what you think of the idea of that and how these people were using microdosing and just the whole scene.
Well, I think the problem is, first of all, because DMT is so short-acting, and because also you can't take it orally, so it's very difficult to microdose DMT unless you have a little puff on a vape or something, which, and then after a few minutes later, it's completely gone from your system. So it doesn't really make any sense to be microdosing DMT. Whereas if you take a microdose of LSD, that's going to be in your system for several hours. So you can imagine it having continued effects throughout the day and even longer. So that's why I think people don't microdose. And people have considered it, certainly. But in my opinion, it would be a total waste of time. Maybe it would have some short-acting impact on your brain that might be beneficial, but I think if you're going to microdose, then it's probably better to stick with either mushrooms or LSD. Same with ketamine as well. I mean, it's also a very short-acting, a little bit longer than DMT, but really, 15, 20 minutes, and again, it's cleared from your system. So, yeah, probably not going to gain much benefit from microdosing DMT.
What happens when you combine all these drugs? Have you ever done any studies on? I mean, that sounds crazy, but like, what would happen if you took DMT, ketamine, psilocybin mushrooms, and ayahuasca all at the same time? Would you just?
Yeah, well, it would be a wild experience. I mean, people do. I mean, drug combinations is kind of a popular pastime of certain kind of intrepid psychonauts. And if you go onto the drug forums, like the DMT Nexus or the 𝗪𝗓𝗟 or Reddit even, people do talk about mixing these drugs. It's certainly, for someone who's not experienced, it's probably a bad idea. It's probably not going to physiologically harm you to mix, mushrooms with ketamine or something. But the problem is that the brain is to say the least, it's an extremely complex system. And so the effects of perturbing the brain with two different drugs at the same time, you can get unexpected effects or unpredictable effects that are completely different to either drug alone, or perhaps more intense than either drug alone. Mixing together 2, 3, 4 different psychedelics at the same time, and people do, is not advised, because you just don't know where you're going to end up. Basically, you don't know what kind of psychological state you're going to reach with these kind of drugs. So tread carefully is what I would say.
Right.
Stick to one at a time is probably the best advice for 99% of people.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that makes perfect sense. But I was just curious. And I also have an interesting fascination with the effects that, let's say, meditation, dream work, breath work all have on time. And you mentioned that even if you take a quick hit of this and you're in there for 5 minutes, your perception of time within there may be much different. And obviously most people have experienced something like that with dreams, with anything, or just in daily life, right? When you're doing something that you hate, and time dilates, and then you're doing something fun, and it's over like this. So is there been any look into our relationship with time and DMT and what that's like?
It's a good question. I mean, one of the questions, kind of the open questions about the extended state DMT studies is that, okay, they're going to be in there for 30 minutes, let's say, but what's that actually experientially going to be like? How long's that going to feel? And yeah, I mean, time is subjective, or our experience of time is subjective. And there are a number of things that determine how much, how we feel time is progressing over time. What is happening during that? How many things happen within a certain brief period of time? When lots of things are happening, lots of different things, your brain is kind of concentrating and processing lots of different things. It's like, even if maybe 5 minutes has passed, it feels like, oh my God, 2 hours have passed. If you're really having a great time, your brain is stimulated, you're doing all these things, you're packing in lots of events. That's the way to say it, I think. You're packing in more events into a certain amount of time. And so the brain goes, oh, this must have been an hour because all these things have happened. And yet it's only been 10 minutes, right? On the other hand, if it's a very repetitive, dull kind of thing that's going on, then not many events are happening, and so the brain thinks, oh my God, this must have only been a very short period of time because nothing has happened, and yet it's actually been several hours. So it's very subjective how our brain interprets and keeps track of time, if you like. And when you're in and that of course is also linked to your environment. We are, our sense of time is, it's not just the movement of the sun. Obviously we have this basic clock of the rise and fall of the sun, and that gives us a sense of the passing of the days. But then you also, the way that you're interacting with the world, the way that cars move, the way that people walk, our brain knows all about relative speeds of these things, and it's interpreting them all the time, and that gives us this feeling, this sense of how time is moving. Now then you translate that into a world that has no relationship whatsoever to the normal waking world, that has a completely different structure, completely different geometry, where events seem to happen differently. There's the sense of cause and effect is disrupted. Nothing makes sense in that world. It's very difficult for your brain to kind of get a handle on the passage of time, I think, in those. That's a very basic explanation, I think, of what could be going on. But certainly it's a fascinating area of study, and I think there have been, I don't recall specific studies, but it's very interesting to kind of speculate on how we perceive time in these different situations and the problems that it might cause. People take LSD, for example, and it takes them forever to climb the stairs. It's like I keep climbing and climbing, but I never got to the top. Right. It's like endless. It's like I'm never going to be able to reach the top of the stairs and stop panicking. It's like they're trapped on this infinite stairwell. Those kind of things. So it's a very real effect, a very dramatic, in some cases, effect, but not necessarily that well understood.
Right. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like I saw somewhere, and I don't know if I'm mixing substances and things, but there have been some, at least maybe it's small and a marginal percentage of precognitive experiences with the use of DMT and potentially understanding things that could happen or would happen. And I know this is still something that's very misunderstood, and we don't understand what's going on when someone tells the future or understands something that potentially could happen, predicts something. But is there any study into, I can imagine people would love to use this, right? If they could go into that sort of state and then come out with Bitcoin will be at this price at this day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, you know what I mean?
Yeah. There's plenty of anecdotal reports for sure, particularly with ayahuasca. Yeah. If you look at reports of indigenous Amazonians who use ayahuasca ritually, traditionally, then you get these reports of people meeting their mother in this alternate reality, and finding out, that their mother, meeting the spirit of their mother in this reality, and then coming back to normal waking reality and finding out that their mother had died that night, or these kind of things, which aren't controlled. It's pure anecdotal evidence, really. Lots of that kind of thing where people, weird coincidences, that a spirit, an entity tells them, you need to call Joe, he's in trouble, and then you call him after you come down from the trip and, he's had a car accident, or this kind of thing, yeah? But I think there are people that take this idea seriously and actually think that psychedelics more generally could be useful in some kind of psychic ability. Because what do psychedelics do is one of the broad effects of psychedelics is to increase the sensitivity of the brain to incoming information. So this is why if you take LSD or magic mushrooms, the colors seem brighter, the world seems more vivid and intense and kind of imbued with meaning. It's like you're seeing the world anew in some sense. And this is because your brain loses control to some extent of the flow of information into the brain. So you can imagine, well, if psychic abilities is all about receiving information from some alternate source, from the future, from somebody else's mind, whatever, then perhaps psychedelics can increase that sensitivity as well. So not just increasing normal sensory perception, but perhaps increasing the sensitivity of extra sensory perception. And there is a psychologist, David Luke, at Greenwich University, a good friend of mine, who's a kind of very famous proponent of DMT, and he's also a parapsychologist, so he's interested in psychic abilities. So I know that he's kind of running, or has been running, very small experiments where he would, give someone one of these standard psychic abilities tests, predicting the next card flip, that kind of thing, and then giving them a psychedelic, or often giving himself a psychedelic. He often works on himself, and then doing the experiment again and seeing if there's a statistically significant difference between his performance before taking LSD or whatever and after taking the drug. So these experiments aren't that difficult to do if you can find enough willing participants. So yeah, it's an interesting. It's not my thing. I'm not really that. I'm not. I used to be when I was a kid. I was really interested in psychic abilities and that kind of thing. But now, I'm fully shifted towards advanced alien intelligences and machine elves and that kind of thing.
Massive shift.
Yeah.
Two more questions. The Gateway Experience, Robert Monroe whole thing. Are you aware of what that is?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Do you know who Robert? Okay. They use, and I'm too dumb to explain what they use, and I've used HemiSync and obviously used, brainwave frequencies and different stuff.
Binaural beats, yes.
Binaural beats, yes, those things, yes. In order to put you in a certain state and do stuff. Fascinating, definitely. I mean, for anybody out there who's never tried it, if you put, what I can say, at least just very anecdotally, is that if you don't put in the consistency with it, you will get nothing out of it, right? Listening to a binaural beat for 30 minutes one day is not going to make you a superhuman, although the prolonged use of it over 30 days or 2 weeks or something, you do notice something, and everybody has different effects. My question then becomes these, and I don't know what they came up with their conclusion for. There's this hilariously popular CIA document that essentially purports to tell the nature of reality based on that and their findings. And where I'm going with this is you haven't really drawn any conclusions yet, have you, on what you know? It seems very much that you're still within the search. Or do you have any conclusions on where and what we're living in now, on the nature of reality?
No, I don't have firm conclusions. I have a very open mind. Some might say too open, but I straddle this. I sit in an unusual position in that I don't. I go way beyond what normal, orthodox, standard neuroscientists would be willing to do. They would never entertain the idea that we could be dealing with some kind of discarnate advanced intelligence with DMT. And yet I'm also not particularly impressed by those who go too far in the other direction and say, oh, you're accessing the spirit world or the astral plane or whatever, right? To me, that doesn't explain anything either. It's easy to say, okay, if you take DMT, you enter the astral plane. That's it. This is where the spirits are. This is the place where you go after you die. Okay, what's been explained? Nothing. So for me, I try and straddle those viewpoints, in a sense, and try to keep one foot firmly in the scientific arena, keep everything anchored to some extent to established neuroscience, what we know about is going on in the brain when you take these drugs, whilst also trying to speculate on what could be the relationship between the experience and some other domain. I don't call it the spirit world. I don't call it the astral plane. I just call it, I think of it as some other place. I don't know what it is. I don't know anything about the relationship between our world and its world or their world. I'm just trying to establish whether or not there is some other place, whether or not we truly are dealing with some kind of true contact event. There are indeed discarnate alien intelligences or intelligences that exist, that continue to exist, that exist before you take the drug, that continue to exist after you leave their space, after the drug wears off. That to me is the best approach, I think, rather than making assumptions about the kind of places that you're going to. Once you do that, then you're anchored to your particular ideology, your particular belief system, your particular worldview, which can, I think, restrict where you allow your explorations and your thinking to take you. So yeah, I get attacked on both sides. The neuroscientists tell me that I'm too far out, whereas the occultists and the mystical New Age types tell me that I'm too materialistic and too science and neuroscience focused. So I can't win, but I don't care.
Yeah. But you're in such a unique time, and I've spoken to some other scientists and researchers. We had Dr. Dean Radin on, as well, and you guys are in this really weird. It's a weird time for you to be around and to be poking into that, and I also understand the juxtaposition that you guys have to hold. While one, it's also very good that you do have that sort of balance, because if you go off one end towards the materialist worldview, you're definitely not going to be able to understand what's going on. And if you go off too far to the other side, everything's in la la land and nothing makes sense and nothing matters and you can't measure anything. So I completely get it. And I mean, he's taken a very similar approach. And it seems that the guys, within your world, and I don't know how many other people are out there, because not everybody's able to tread that line like you guys do and are able to speak about it publicly while maintaining that level, of seriousness and scientific research in order to convey that to the populace. Because I find it incredibly important, because people are very much locked, and we're getting very much separated, within the world into our echo chambers of this and that, and you don't get any of the information out there. And so, with that being said, you said you were writing another book, since we're about to finish up. Can you say what else you're going to dive into? So
this book will be a kind of a detailed account of the history, the science, the mystery of DMT. We 100% focused on DMT, how the science of our understanding of DMT has progressed over the last century, where DMT came from originally, how it was discovered, and all the kind of research that's gone on over the last decade, and how we interpret it, what it means, whether or not we can explain it, whether we need to start thinking about actual discarnate alien intelligences to explain it, all this kind of stuff. But it will be aimed at quite a mainstream audience this time. We're just trying to clinch a deal with a major publishing house at the moment. So hopefully it will be mainstreaming DMT to some extent. That's the plan.
Okay. Well, that's awesome. We'll look out for that, obviously. An hour is never enough to get to the nature of reality, but we'll have to do this some other time. And is there any place where people should look out for more?
Sure. I mean, I have a web. So my first two books, Alien Information Theory and Reality Switch Technologies, my latest one, which is a detailed guide to how psychedelics, all the different types of psychedelics work in the brain, how they change the nature and structure of your experienced world. They're both available in all good bookstores and some pretty dodgy ones as well, and Amazon, of course. If you want to go to my website, alieninsect.net, that's where you'll find links to my books and to many of my interviews and papers and articles and other things that I've written. And of course, follow me on Twitter if you're on Twitter, or X as it's called, formerly known as Twitter. Alien Insect is my Twitter or X name. So please do follow me on there. I post regularly about psychedelics and other psychoactive drugs and all those good things.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah, obviously we will link to all of this, guys. It'll be in the show notes or in the description box if you're watching this on YouTube. Andrew, I really appreciate it, man. Learned a lot. It's awesome.
You're welcome, Will. Thank you very much.